The dispatch packet was sealed with gray wax and stamped with the Frontier Authority's double ring, which meant it was either a routine border census return or something that had been sitting in a relay station for longer than anyone cared to admit. Most of what I carried fell into one of those two categories. I'd been running courier work along the Kethoran passes for 3 years, and I'd learned to read the weight of a packet before I ever broke the seal. Light meant census data. Heavy meant someone had died, and the paperwork had finally caught up. This one was heavy. I pulled my coat collar up against the wind coming off the glacier and guided my transport into the outer approach road that led up to the Vale Reach Fortress. The road here had been cut through the mountain's flank in a series of long, gradual switchbacks, each one giving a wider view of the pass below, the flat gray shine of the snowmelt runoff in the valley floor, the dark line of the lowland tree cover, the distant smear of the Frontier Authority's mid-pass garrison at the edge of the cleared zone. I'd driven this approach dozens of times in the past 3 years, and I still noted those views each time, automatically, the way you catalog terrain when the territory is yours to move through and you've grown responsible to it. The reach itself sat at the highest navigable point of the pass, a place where the stone of the mountain had been cut and shaped and reinforced with alloy strapping until it was hard to tell where the natural rock ended and the construction began. The upper towers were lost in low cloud. The lower walls dripped with meltwater. The flagstones of the outer yard were the dark gray of old iron, grooved by centuries of boot traffic and wheel load, and they caught the morning light in a way that made them look like still water. Something about that particular light on those particular flagstones settled into me every time I came up the approach road. I'd never been able to account for it. The reach was not mine. I had no reason for the quiet sense of arrival it produced. I'd been here twice before. Both times I'd handed my packet at the outer gate, waited while a gate officer checked my manifest, and been back on the road within the hour. The Vale Reach was busy. They didn't waste time on couriers. This time the gate officer took the packet, looked at my manifest, and then looked at my face. Then he looked at my wrist. I wear my left sleeve long. I've done it for years. It's a habit I can't fully account for. I know it started before I took the courier work. Sometime in the gap of months I don't remember clearly, the stretch between waking up in a frontier medical facility with a name I was told was mine, and the day I signed my first route contract. My wrist carries a mark. I was told at the medical facility that it was a procedural brand, a notation from a prior deployment. Standard frontier military identification. It sits high on the inside of the wrist, a set of interlocking lines in a style I've never seen anywhere else, and I've kept it covered because it invites questions I don't have answers to. The gate officer was looking at the hem of my left sleeve. "Courier registration," he said. I handed him my papers. He looked at them. He looked at my wrist again. "Step inside the secondary hold," he said. Secondary hold was for suspected contraband carriers. I'd never been sent there. I said I wasn't carrying anything undeclared, and he said he understood that, and could I please step inside. So I did, because arguing with gate officers at Highland fortresses when you've got a heavy packet on your back is the kind of thing that ends careers. They kept me there for 40 minutes. Long enough that I sat down on the bench along the hold's interior wall, set my pack beside me, and watched the meltwater trace lines down the outside of the window glass. My breath fogged. The hold was cold in the way that high mountain stone is always cold, a deep chill that doesn't answer to fires or heating elements, that lives in the rock itself. I didn't know what I'd done. I ran through the last 3 delivery points. Tarvin Post, unremarkable. The Solon relay station, where a young clerk had taken 3 hours to process my receipt and apologized twice for the delay. The secondary garrison at the Kethoran mid-pass, where I'd eaten a bowl of something hot and forgettable and slept in the courier bunk for 6 hours before the road opened again. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should have sent me to secondary hold at the reach. I thought about the mark. I thought about it the way I sometimes did when I had time and nothing else pressing, turning it over without getting anywhere. The way you handle a stone you found in a riverbed that has the wrong weight for its size and you can't determine why. The medic at Talhan had logged it without apparent interest, a neat notation in my intake record. Procedural brand, prior deployment. I had accepted that because there was no better explanation available, and because there are only so many times you can press the same unanswered question before you develop the sense to leave it alone. But the gate officer's look and the household woman's look, those were not the looks of people who'd seen a procedural brand. The door opened and a woman in the livery of the Empress's household staff came in. Not a gate officer, household staff. She looked at me the way the gate officer had, which is to say she looked at my face and then, quite deliberately, at my left wrist. I noticed that she was holding herself very carefully, the way a person does when they've been told to keep their expression neutral and they're working at it. "Are you well, courier?" she said. "I'm fine," I said. "I'd like to know why I'm in secondary hold." "There's no concern about your cargo," she said. "Her Excellency the Empress Regent has a question regarding your route documentation, if you'd come with me." "Her Excellency the Empress Regent," I repeated. "Yes." I'd carried packets addressed to her before, sealed and handed off through her gate officers the way all such deliveries worked. I'd never been brought inside. Couriers didn't go inside. There was a reason for that. It kept the work clean, kept the runners from becoming entangled in whatever politics were moving through any given post. I had 7 other deliveries waiting on my route. I had a schedule. "How long will it take?" I said. The household woman looked at me steadily. "I don't know," she said, and that was honest enough that I picked up my pack and followed her. The Vale Reach interior was older than its exterior suggested. The outer yard was maintenance scrubbed and military functional, but once you passed through the second gate and into the covered corridors of the inner keep, the stone changed character. Here it had been cut by different hands, older hands, and there were carvings along the wall courses that I didn't recognize, long flowing lines that curved into each other in patterns that reminded me vaguely of the mark on my wrist, though I couldn't have said why exactly. I noticed other things as we walked. The way the corridors were laid out, not the efficient grid of a frontier garrison but something older, a spiral logic, each turn offering a view of either the inner courtyard below or the outer wall above. Someone had designed this building to make it difficult to approach the interior quickly and easy to defend from any point on the approach. I didn't know how I knew that. I'd been in fortresses before, working the routes, but not many with this particular layout, and I wasn't a military planner. I just looked at the walls and corridors and felt the logic of them settle into place the way something familiar settles. We passed through 3 sets of doors. Each set was heavier than the last. The household woman knocked at the third, a deep, iron-bound thing set into a carved archway, and waited, and a voice from inside said something in a language I didn't know. The door opened. The room inside was a records hall. I could tell by the shelving, floor to ceiling on 3 walls, filled with rolled documents and bound ledger cases, and the flat storage tubes used for cartographic work. There was a long table in the center with several open ledgers on it. There was a fire going on the right-hand wall, which was the only reason the temperature in the room was survivable. The woman behind the table was Empress Regent Sarathin Vale. I'd seen her image on official seals. The frontier authorities' correspondence with the Vale Reach always carried her cipher, a stylized rendering of the fortress gate flanked by 2 interlocking lines. You learn to recognize it, but an image on a seal is a reduction. It doesn't prepare you for the actual person. She was tall, with the lean-built frame of someone who has spent years on highland terrain and whose body has answered accordingly. Her skin was the color of deep slate, a warm gray with something underneath it, a faint violet note in the way the firelight caught her. Her hair was dark indigo, cut simply, worn loose past her shoulders, and there was silver in it, threaded through at the temples and along the part, the kind of silver that comes not from age alone but from years of carrying weight. Her eyes, when she looked up from the ledger in front of her, were amber. Not light amber, deep amber, the color of old resin caught in afternoon light. She looked at me the way the gate officer and the household woman had looked at me, face first, then wrist. I was still wearing my left sleeve long. She set down the stylus she was holding. She folded her hands on the ledger in front of her. She was very still. "Thank you, Hessen," she said to the household woman, and the household woman went out and closed the door. We were alone in the records hall, the Empress Regent of the Vale Reach and a frontier courier who had no idea why he was there. "I'm told your name is Davin Marsh," she said. "Yes, Your Excellency." "How long have you been running the Kethoran route?" 3 years. Before that, I was on the Eastern Lowland routes for about a year. Before that, I was in a frontier medical facility at Talhin Post for approximately 4 months. Before Talhin Post. "I don't have a complete record of that," I said. "There was an injury, a pressure incident on a border assignment. I lost some months." She didn't say anything for a moment. The fire shifted and settled. "What border assignment?" she said. The documentation at Talhin listed it as a general frontier service deployment. No unit designation recovered. I was reassigned to civilian courier work when I was cleared for active duty. They said my file had been partially lost in a relay station collapse. The duty record was reconstructed from fragments. I paused. "I'm sorry. I don't know why any of this is relevant to my route documentation." "It isn't," she said. "I'm sorry. I'm asking you questions that have nothing to do with your route. You're the Empress Regent. You can ask what you like." She looked at me. Something moved across her face, quick and then contained. "May I see your left wrist?" she said. I looked at her steadily for a moment. There was nothing threatening in the request. There was something else in it, something careful, something held very tightly in check, but it wasn't a threat. I pushed back my left sleeve. She looked at the mark. She looked at it for a long time. Long enough that I had time to look at it with her, which I didn't usually do. The interlocking lines, their particular style, the way the outer ring met the inner pattern at 3 points that formed something like a symbol, and something like a map reference, and something like neither of those things. "Do you know what that is?" she said. I was told it was a deployment notation, frontier military identification. "It's not," she said. She said it quietly. She said it without any particular emphasis, the way a person states a fact they've known for a long time and have stopped being surprised by. "Then what is it?" I said. She was quiet again. She unfolded her hands and rested them flat on the table, and I saw that her right hand, palm down against the ledger, was trembling slightly. Not fear. Something older and more specific than fear. The trembling of a thing held carefully under great pressure for a long time. "It's a Vale Consort's mark," she said. "It's given at the time of formal bonding by a senior Vale ceremony keeper to the chosen partner of the reigning Empress or Empress Regent. It's specific to this line. There are perhaps 11 living people who carry that mark. They are all of the Vale household and have been within the Reach's walls for the entirety of their lives." I looked at my wrist. "I'm not a member of your household." "No," she said, "you're not." "Then there's been some kind of administrative mix-up with the—" "It's not an administrative mix-up," she said. "The mark can't be replicated. The lines are done with a compound that requires the ceremony keeper's own preparation. Each mark is unique to the individual bonded pair. The inner pattern changes based on the recipient." She paused. "The inner pattern on your wrist is mine." I didn't say anything. The fire shifted again. Outside, through the narrow slit windows of the records hall, the glacier wind moved across the yard, and the sound of it was the same sound wind always makes in high stone places. A low, carrying note, almost musical, almost not. 12 years ago, she said, the man who carried that mark was declared dead in a border collapse in the Kethoran Highlands. His unit's relay station failed during a pressure event. Several soldiers died. The records from the incident were corrupted. His body was not recovered. I received official notification of his death 7 months after the incident when the damaged records were finally reconstructed. She stopped. He was 31 when the notification reached me. I was 33. I was 38. I had been in a frontier medical facility at the age of 31. I had no memory of the 4 months before I woke up there. I looked at her hands, still pressed flat against the table, still trembling slightly with the effort of keeping themselves still. I don't remember, I said. Whatever you think I am, whatever that mark means, I don't remember any of it. I've been Davin Marsh for 7 years. That's all I have. I know, she said. I can see that. I don't know your name. You knew it, she said, once. I don't know it now. She held herself very still for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Sarithin. I didn't know why that hit me the way it did. It was a name, a word, syllables in a particular arrangement. But something happened in my chest when she said it, something I didn't have a word for, something that was not quite recognition and not quite pain and was entirely too close to both of them for comfort. Sarithin, I said. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her hand came off the table. Her amber eyes were very bright. That's how you said it, she said. That particular pause, that particular weight on the second syllable. No one else has ever said it that way. I don't understand what's happening. I know, she said again. I'm going to try to explain it to you. And I'm going to ask you to be patient with me because I've been doing this. She stopped, gathered herself, started again. Because I've had 12 years to accept that you were gone, and you're standing in my records hall in a courier's coat, and I'm trying very hard to conduct myself with appropriate composure. She didn't quite manage that last part. She said it steadily enough, but her voice on the final words had something in it that she hadn't managed to put away. I sat down in the chair across the table from her, not because she'd asked me to, because it seemed like the right thing to do. Tell me, I said. His name had been Davin Vorath. Not Marsh. That was the clerical alias the Talhan Post had assigned from an incomplete intake record. The frontier military's relay station at the Kethoran Mid-Pass had gone down during a pressure event in what had been the 9th year of Sarithin's regency. She told me this carefully, watching my face as she told it, nodding what moved and what didn't. He had been a border officer, not a soldier exactly. The distinction mattered in the Vale Reach's organizational hierarchy, which was more complex than the frontier authority's simple rank structure. Border officers handled the liaison work between the human frontier posts and the Vale Reach's own patrol system. They knew both sides of the border. They had to. He had known the Reach. He had known her. You came to the fortress first as a treaty interpreter, she said. There was a land use dispute in the lower pass, and the frontier authority sent an officer who spoke enough of our language to carry the preliminary conversation. You were 26. You'd learned the language in garrison school and you were embarrassed about your accent. Was I right to be embarrassed? She looked at me steadily. Your accent was terrible, she said, and it improved. Something in my chest moved again. That involuntary pull towards something I couldn't name. How long was I here? 2 years before the bonding, 4 years total before the collapse. She paused. You were 31. We'd been bonded for 2 years. I did the arithmetic. 7 years at Talhan Post and after. 4 months at the medical facility before that, which put the pressure event at year 3 or 4 of whatever period I'd been working at the Mid-Pass garrison. It fit. The timeline fit, in the way that things sometimes fit when you're looking at a shape in the dark and can't quite see the edges but can feel that the pieces are the same size. They told you I died, I said. 7 months after the collapse, yes. The notification came from the Frontier Authority's Casualty Office, a formal document, My name, your name, the incident designation, the declaration. She looked at the fire. It had your seal on it. My seal. A border officer's duty seal, a ring with a particular cipher. She looked at me. You wore it on your right hand. I looked at my right hand. No ring. There had been a ring at Talhin. I had a vague memory of it early in the Reconstruction period before the final round of medical work. I'd been told it was a service item and that I'd have to surrender it on processing out of military status. I had. I hadn't thought about it since. It was in the notification document, she said. I kept the document for a long time. I eventually had it filed. She looked at the shelving behind her. It's in this room. The record of his death was on the shelves around us. I looked at my wrist. The mark there, the interlocking lines in the particular compound that couldn't be replicated, that held her pattern in its inner geometry. The mark that a military medic at Talhin Post had looked at and logged as a procedural deployment notation without understanding what it was. Who would have told them? I said. If the relay records were corrupted and my identity file was damaged, who would have provided my name to the casualty office? She was quiet for a moment. There was a senior officer at the Mid-Pass garrison, a man named Thuron Colt. He was the garrison commander. He survived the collapse. And Thuron Colt had applied for the border officer position you were given. He'd been passed over. He was not, she stopped. He died 6 years ago, of natural causes as far as anyone knows. I don't have evidence that he provided false information to the casualty office. I only know that the file that reached Talhin Post was missing your actual name, and that the name Davin Marsh does not appear in any Vale Reach or Frontier Authority records before your medical intake. She looked at me. I've been looking for those answers for 12 years. You've been looking for me. I've been looking for what happened, she said. For a long time I wasn't looking for you because I believed you were dead. When did you stop believing that? She was quiet again for a longer moment. Outside, the glacier wind moved across the yard, its long carrying note against the stone. 3 years ago, she said, a patrol officer came back from a lowland supply run and mentioned in passing that he'd been helped with a route difficulty by a frontier courier. He mentioned the courier's name and the courier's accent and the way the courier had stood quietly while the patrol officer worked through a logistical problem, and then offered one precise observation that resolved it. She paused. He said the courier had a way of holding his silence that felt like he'd been trained in Vale border protocols. He mentioned it to you. He mentioned it because I had made it known that I wanted to hear about any human couriers working the Kethoran routes who seemed familiar with the Reach's protocols. She looked at her hands. I'd been making that known for 3 years before he told me about you. I'd heard about 6 couriers in that time. None of them were you. And then he mentioned your name and your accent and the way you held your silence, and She stopped. I asked my gate officers to hold the next Kethoran courier carrying a dispatch packet and tell me who it was, she said. And then your manifest came through, and it was your name, and I asked them to send you to secondary hold until I was ready to see you. You've been waiting for me, I said. I've been trying, she said carefully, to be a person who doesn't build expectations she can't sustain. So I will say instead that I had a significant amount of information that suggested you might come through this gate, and I was trying to be prepared for either outcome. Either outcome meaning I was you or I wasn't. Yes. I looked at her across the table, the firelight on her slate-gray skin, the silver in her dark indigo hair, the amber of her eyes, which had not looked away from me since the household woman had left the room. I'm not the same person he was, I said. Whatever I was before, whatever he was, he's not who I am now. I've been Davin Marsh for 7 years. I've built 7 years of work and memory and habit on top of whatever I lost. I don't know how to give you back the man you're looking for. I'm not asking you to, she said. Then what are you asking? She was quiet for a long moment. The fire had settled to a low, steady burn. The records hall around us held its silence, the rows of document cases, the ledgers on the table, the cartographic tubes in their flat cases. The document that declared him dead was somewhere on those shelves. The mark on my wrist was somewhere on those shelves too, in the ceremony records that she would have kept. "I'm asking you," she said very quietly, "to consider the possibility that you are not a reconstruction, that you have not been rebuilt from fragments into something less than you were." She paused. The border officer I knew, the man I chose, was composed. He was not glamorous or loud or particularly remarkable at first meeting. He was the kind of person who held his silence and watched a situation until he understood it, and then said one thing that was exactly right. He was the kind of person who, when he walked into a difficult room, made the room less difficult simply by being still in it. She looked at me steadily. "You sat down across this table from me without being asked," she said, "because it seemed like the right thing to do, because you could see that I needed someone to sit across from me. I didn't say anything." "That's who he was," she said. "She asked me to stay for the midday meal. I said I had a route schedule. She said she understood and sent someone to the gate officer to have the route continuance paperwork filed, which would extend my delivery window at the reach by 48 hours without penalty. I didn't argue with that. I wasn't sure I was capable of arguing with much at that point. She took me out of the records hall through a side door that opened into a covered walkway looking down into the inner courtyard. The courtyard below had a training area on one end and a kitchen garden on the other, the garden still dormant in the early spring cold, raised beds of dark earth waiting for whatever they grew there. I could see the layout clearly from the walkway, the way the training area was positioned to give maximum sight lines from the upper wall posts, the way the kitchen garden had been placed in the only section of the courtyard that caught full afternoon sun. Someone had thought carefully about both of those things. Someone had understood the practical requirements and met them efficiently, without ceremony. Household staff moved across the courtyard below. One of them, a younger woman, looked up as we passed along the walkway, and her face went very still in the same way the gate officer's face had gone still, and I understood then that the Reaches people knew what I might be. That word had moved through the fortress in the 40 minutes I'd been in secondary hold. "How many people know about this?" I said. "My household knows what I've been looking for," she said. "They know the shape of the search. They don't know what conclusion to draw yet." She looked down at the courtyard. "Hessen has been with me for 15 years. She was here when I received the notification. She was the one who told me to file it and move forward. She's been watching every courier I've asked about." "What does she think of me?" "She thinks," Sarathan said carefully, "that I should be very cautious, that I should have the ceremony records checked against your mark before drawing any conclusions, that I should be prepared for the possibility of coincidence." "Is she right?" "She's usually right," Sarathan said. "That's why I keep her close." She paused. "I had the ceremony records checked before I asked the gate officer to hold you. The mark geometry is not coincidence." We turned off the walkway into a smaller dining room, not a formal hall, a working room with a long table and benches and a southern window that caught the watery highland sun. Someone had laid two places at one end of the table, close together, with bread and a small tureen of something hot, and the wide shallow cups that were used at the Reach for morning drink. I knew they were the Reach's specific style. I knew this without knowing that I knew it. I sat down. I looked at the cup in front of me. "I've been here before," I said. She sat down across from me. She waited. "I know these cups," I said. "I don't know why I know them. I've only been to the outer gate twice before today." "You had a particular seat in the morning room," she said. "The room with the south window, this room. You said northern light made it harder to read the patrol reports." She paused. "You came here in the mornings before going down to the gate office." I looked at the table. The grain of the wood, old and dark and worn smooth in the patterns of years of use. There was a mark near the left side of the table's surface, a faint indentation that might have been made by a seal ring pressed into soft wood a long time ago. "Did I do that?" I said. She looked where I was looking. "Yes," she said. I ran my thumb over it. The indentation was exactly the right depth for a service seal ring pressed by someone working through correspondence, not thinking about the table surface, leaning their weight on their right hand. The morning room, the south window, the seal ring pressed into the table. "I can't give you back who he was," I said again. "You keep saying that," she said. "Because it's true." "It's partially true," she said. "There are things you've lost that I won't recover. There are 4 years of shared experience that exist only in my memory now. There are things you knew about me that I'll never be able to tell you because you learned them, not because I told them to you." She stopped. "There's a version of grief in that which I've already done," she said. "I've grieved those specific things. I've put them down." "And what's left?" She looked at me steadily across the table, the firelight from the room's small hearth catching the amber of her eyes. "A person I chose," she said, 12 years older, with a different name and a broken file and 7 years of work built on top of a foundation he doesn't remember, but the foundation is still there. The way he holds his silence, the way he sat down because it seemed like the right thing to do, the way he says my name." She paused. "Those things aren't learned from a file. They aren't administrative facts. They're the person. The mark on your wrist is the most unambiguous possible confirmation of who you are. But I knew before I looked at it." "When," I said, "when did you know?" "When you said it was reasonable that I could ask what I liked because I was the Empress Regent," she said. "He used to say that same precise phrasing. When I was anxious about overstepping, you'd say, it's your reach, Sarathan. You can ask what you like." I didn't remember saying it. I'd said it in the secondary hold as an observation about the power differential in the room, which was accurate and had seemed like the obvious thing to say. I hadn't known I was echoing something older. "Your reach," I said. "Yes." We sat with that for a moment. The highland wind was quieter here on the south side of the fortress, away from the glacier face. The raised beds in the courtyard below caught the thin sun. We ate the bread, the hot broth in the tureen, the morning drink in the wide, shallow cups, and somewhere in the process of eating she began to tell me more, and I began to listen, and the meal stretched long past its natural end because neither of us was ready to be done with it. She told me about the 4 years. Not all at once, not as a recitation. She told it the way people tell things that have been kept carefully for a long time, in pieces, one thing leading to the next, following the thread wherever it went. He had known the veil solstice ceremony format before he was supposed to. He'd asked about it with the exact wrong questions that showed he'd studied the surface of it without understanding the heart of it, and she'd had to explain the difference between the formal protocol and what it actually meant. And he'd listened with the total attention that she had apparently come to associate with him specifically. The stillness that meant he was filing every word into some internal architecture that would hold it reliably for years. He'd been assigned as interpreter and had kept coming back, not because the land use dispute required it, that had been resolved in the first season cleanly, to the satisfaction of both parties. He'd kept coming back because there was more to understand about how the two sides of the border worked together, and understanding it required being present, and being present at the reach was, he had eventually told her, simply where he wanted to be. She had appreciated the honesty of that. He hadn't dressed it up. He'd had opinions about border patrol rotation schedules that the council hadn't wanted to hear. He'd presented them twice before the council came around. Not because he'd argued more forcefully the second time, but because he'd simply been right, and the evidence had accumulated to a point where it was impossible to ignore. He hadn't said, "I told you so." He'd asked what resources they needed for the implementation. He'd been afraid of the glacier route in early thaw. Not in a way he talked about. He simply stopped using it after the first warm week of spring, every year, and routed his border inspection work along the southern pass instead. She'd asked him about it once, and he'd said the ice on the third curve above the snowline behaves unpredictably when the temperature crosses the freeze threshold in the wrong direction. She'd said she'd have to take his word for it. He'd said that was fine. He would always be happy to provide the words. She laughed when she told me that part. A short, quiet laugh, unexpected, it surfaced before she could decide whether to let it out, and then she sat with it for a moment, her amber eyes distant. He was funny, she said. Not loudly, just she paused. He said dry things at exactly the right moment. You never saw it coming. I'm told I do that occasionally, I said. The couriers at Solon Relay Station find it difficult to work with. She looked at me with those amber eyes. Do they? They say I give advice and then stand quietly until someone acts on it. And the standing quietly part is what they find difficult. Yes, she said. That was the other thing. She looked at her cup. He would say the one correct thing and then wait. He never over-explained. He'd make the observation and then just hold still and let it work. She paused. Most people don't do that. Most people get nervous in the silence and start adding to what they've said until the point is buried. I don't add, I said. I've been told that's also difficult to work with. She looked at me. He would have appreciated that description. She told me about the council. He had attended the administrative council sessions from the beginning. She had told him he didn't have to, and he had said he wanted to understand how the reach was run. And understanding how the reach was run required being in the room where the decisions were made. The council had not been uniformly welcoming. Some of the senior administrators had considered his presence an intrusion, a human consort with no formal training in Vale governance, sitting in on deliberations that had run the same way for generations. He had sat through the first 3 sessions without saying anything. On the 4th, a logistics problem had surfaced, a recurring inefficiency in the Eastern Corridor supply chain that the council had been managing around for years rather than solving. And he had waited until the discussion had exhausted itself, and then offered a 3-part solution that required no new resources and addressed all 3 causes of the inefficiency. The room had been quiet for a moment, and then one of the senior administrators had said that those changes would require adjustment to 2 standing protocols, and he had said yes. And then he had explained exactly which adjustments and why, and the administrator had said she would draw up the revised protocols, and that was that. He said to me afterward, Sarathan said, that he was aware he was working with a credibility deficit, being human in a Vale administrative body, and that the most efficient way to address a credibility deficit was to be demonstrably correct and then not draw attention to it. That's a reasonable approach, I said. It was extremely effective, she said. Within 2 years, the senior administrators were bringing logistics problems to him directly. She paused. He was not triumphant about this. He was just useful. He wanted to be useful, and he was, and that was sufficient for him. Did that frustrate you? I said. That he didn't want more recognition than that? She looked at me. No, she said. It was one of the things I trusted most about him. He wasn't working towards something. He was just present and competent. And paying attention. That's rarer than people understand. We sat in the quiet of the morning room while the Highland afternoon deepened around us, the last of the thin sun moving off the south window, the kitchen garden in the courtyard below going into shade. She told me small things and large things in no particular order, and I listened to all of them with the same attention, which she noticed and did not comment on directly, but which I saw her notice. She said there were parts of it that were private and would stay private until I remembered them or chose to know them differently, on my own terms. But she told me about the weeks before it, when he had been learning the ceremony protocols and getting them consistently wrong in ways that she found maddening in the morning and quietly funny by evening. He had prepared too thoroughly. He'd researched the formal protocol in the Frontier Authority's limited records, and arrived at the ceremony keeper's first lesson already certain he understood the shape of things. And the ceremony keeper had very gently disassembled his certainty piece by piece, and he had listened to the disassembly with the same total attention he brought to everything, and rebuilt his understanding from the actual foundation. She told me he'd been embarrassed about the mistake for about 2 days and had then moved on, which she described as typical of him. He didn't carry embarrassment long. He assessed what had gone wrong and corrected it, and that was the end of it. She told me about the way he had stood at the ceremony itself, composed, which was how he always stood, but with a kind of weight to the composure, an anchored quality, as though he decided something important before he walked into that room, and the decision had settled all the way down through him. The ceremony keeper had later told her that of all the consorts she had ever presided over, he was the only human she had worked with, and that she had been prepared to find his stillness difficult to read, and instead had found it the clearest thing in the room. She told me about the first winter after the bonding, when the pass had been closed for 11 days by a late storm, and the fortress had run on reduced supply, and everyone had been shorter with each other than usual except for him, who had simply continued to be exactly himself, steady and dry and useful and present, which she had found in that particular 11 days to be the most stabilizing possible thing. He had reorganized the supply inventory records during the closure because they had errors that were going to cause problems in the spring restocking, and there was no reason to wait. He had fixed the records and left a note on her desk explaining the changes and the reasons for them, in the compact angular hand, using the minimum words necessary. The supply inventory had run cleanly for 3 years after that. He was, she said, and then she stopped and looked at the table and tried again. There was something about knowing he was in the building, not dependent. I wasn't dependent on his presence, but there was a quality to the day when he was in it that was different from the quality of days when he wasn't. She looked up at me. I've been paying attention to the quality of days for 12 years. I notice what they lack. I looked at my hands. One of the medics at Talhan told me something, I said. She said identity isn't in what you remember. It's in what you do when you're not thinking about who you are. She looked at me steadily. Something moved in her face, careful and held back but present. You would have written that down, she said. I didn't write it down. But you remembered it. I suppose I did. We finished the meal. The afternoon had come on while we talked, the watery highland sun shifting in the south window. A household attendant came to clear the table and gave me one long, careful look as he took my cup, the look of someone confirming something to himself. I watched him go. The whole fortress knows, I said. The household knows something significant is happening, she said. They don't know the shape of it yet, and I won't tell them until I know what you want. What I want? Yes, she looked at me squarely. You're the one who's been living a borrowed name for 7 years. You're the one who has to decide what to do with your actual one. In the afternoon, she showed me the records hall in detail. Not the shelving, not the documents exactly, though she showed me where things were, where his patrol reports sat in their binding cases, where the glacier maps were kept in their flat tubes. She showed me the room. She'd made it hers over the 12 years, layer by layer, the way a person fills a space that had been shared. The desk had new work on it. The fire tools were her style, not the older set she'd apparently let go. But the table in the center was the same table, and the cartographic tube cases along the lower shelves had his notation system on their labels, a compact angular hand that was different from her own longer script. You labeled them, she said, when she saw me looking at the labels. I recognize the handwriting, I said. She was still, do you? I recognize it, I said carefully, the way you recognize a word in a language you studied long ago and almost entirely forgot. Not full comprehension, something underneath it. He had a distinctive hand, she said. Angular. He said it was a garrison school habit. They made you write quickly and you compensated by making the letters compact. I looked at the label on the nearest tube. The angular compact letters, the way the notation code was structured, not quite the way I'd have done it today, but close. Close enough that I'd have needed to look twice to be certain it wasn't mine. She took one of the tubes from the lower shelves and laid it on the table, opened it carefully, and unrolled the map inside. It was a glacier route chart, hand-corrected in several places in that same compact angular hand. The corrections were thorough. Wherever the official Frontier Authority rendering had a surveying error or an outdated notation, he'd marked the correct reference in a different ink and drawn the actual contour line over the original. 3 people died on this route the spring after the collapse, she said. In the section here. She touched the map, a curve of the route above the snowline. There was a correction notation in his hand near the section she was touching, a careful note about the particular behavior of the ice in early thaw conditions. The correction was already there, I said. Yes, the patrol officer who took over the route documentation after, she paused. After I thought you were gone. He didn't read the corrections carefully. He thought they were aesthetic preferences. He used the official Frontier rendering for his route planning. I looked at the note. The ice on the 3rd curve above the snowline behaves unpredictably when the temperature crosses the freeze threshold in the wrong direction. Go south. Always go south after the first warm week. The note was written in a compact angular hand, with the calm conviction of someone who knows a thing well enough that they don't need to justify it. I know this route, I said. I've known it for 3 years. I know that the 3rd curve is dangerous in early thaw, and I route south after the first warm week, every year without entirely knowing why. She looked at me, she looked at the note on the map, she looked back at me. The knowledge is in you, she said. It's in you the way all of it is in you, under the years, under the name they gave you at Talhan, under the reconstruction. She touched the map lightly near the notation. You were not made from nothing. You were never nothing. What do you want from me? I said, not unkindly, honestly. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the shelves. 12 years ago, she said, I was told you were gone. I was given a document with your name and your seal and the incident designation and the declaration. I did what a regent does. I absorbed it. I put it where it needed to go. I kept the reach functioning. I didn't pretend I was fine, but I kept the reach functioning. She paused. And I worked in this room, with the maps you labeled and the table you marked and the records I'd built alongside you for 4 years, and I made it my room over time. I allowed myself to grieve. I allowed myself to move forward. I did not, she stopped. I made a deliberate decision not to keep a space for someone who I was told would not be coming back, because that is not healthy and it is not useful and it is not what a regent can afford. But you kept the maps, I said. I kept the maps because they're correct, she said. The glacier route documentation is accurate, and I have not yet found anyone who maintains it to that standard. That's not why you kept them. She looked at me steadily. No, she said, it's not entirely why. We stood together in the records hall, the 2 of us, in the room where the document that had declared him dead sat in its case on the shelving. The fire was lower now, the afternoon light through the slit windows going gray. I'm not asking you to be who you were, she said. I'm not asking you to step back into a role that you have no memory of, to perform a bond you can't feel yet, to pretend continuity you don't have access to. That would be, she shook her head. That would be the kind of thing that makes people break, and I've spent 12 years making sure I didn't break. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to let me tell you who you are, she said. Not what I need you to be, not a replacement for the person I lost, but who you actually are, what the ceremony records say, what the mark on your wrist means, what the 4 years were. I'm asking you to have that information. She looked at me. And then I'm asking you to make whatever decision seems right to you. Stay or go, come back or don't. I have no claim on you that you haven't chosen to acknowledge. The bond's legal recognition was suspended at the death declaration. You're a free person. You're a courier. You have a route. I have a route, I said. Yes. I looked at the table. The mark in the grain where a service ring had been pressed into the wood by someone who was thinking about patrol reports and not about the table. The right-hand wall, I said. What? The fire is on the right-hand wall, I said. When I came in this morning, I noted that. I noted it, and I thought it was an odd placement for a records room, fire risk to the documents. And then I thought someone must have had a reason for putting it there. Someone who used this room in cold weather and needed warmth on their right side while they worked. She was very still. He was left-handed, I said. He worked with his right side toward the heat so his writing hand stayed warm. I am left-handed. I have always been left-handed. The work has always been easier on the left, and I've always positioned myself at tables with my right toward the heat when there's a choice about it, because the left hand needs to move freely and the right can take the warmth. Yes, she said, her voice was very quiet. That's exactly why. The room held us both for a long moment. I don't have the memories, I said, but it seems as though I have the person. Some of it. I paused. Enough of it that I put myself on the right side of the fire without thinking about it. She looked at the fire, then at me. Then she did something she hadn't done since the household woman had closed the door of the records hall that morning. She looked away, just for a moment. She looked at the shelving, at the rows of document cases, at the labeled tubes in their flat cases. Then she looked back at me, and in the amber of her eyes there was something that had not been there before, not grief, not its edge, but the first evidence of its other side, the thing that waits on the far bank of 12 years of carrying. I'm not going to ask you to stay today, she said. You have a route, you have 7 deliveries, you have 3 years of a life in the Kethoran passes that you've built honestly. She paused. I have work to do. I have a border to administer and a council that needs my attention and patrol reports that need reviewing. She looked at me with those steady amber eyes. But you know where the reach is, and I know your route. You know my route, I said. I asked for your manifest when they brought you in. The schedule is not a secret. It's a registered frontier route. I know when you'll be back in the pass. How long? 3 weeks, if the mid-pass road holds in the thaw. It'll hold, I said. I know the ice behavior on that section. I stopped, heard what I'd said. I don't know how I know that. You know it, she said, because you spent 4 years learning it and the knowledge is in you the way all of it is in you. Under the years, under the name they gave you at Talhan, under the reconstruction. She looked at me steadily. You were not made from nothing. You were never nothing. You were always this person. I looked at my wrist. The mark there, the geometry of it, the lines she had described as hers in the inner pattern. 12 years on a frontier route, carried like a deployment notation, kept under a long sleeve out of habit I couldn't explain. I'll come back in 3 weeks, I said. I know you will, she said. Not a demand, not a plea, just a certainty stated quietly the way she stated facts. I picked up my pack from where it sat by the records hall door. I turned back once at the threshold. Sarathan, I said. She looked at me. The amber eyes, the firelight, the room that was hers now and had been his once and was perhaps beginning to be, the start of something that didn't have a word yet. I'll review the glacier documentation before I come back, I said, in case there are errors. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face that was not quite a smile and not quite the thing before a smile. That was instead the very first edge of a weight going down. A weight set on a shelf after 12 years of being carried. There are errors, she said. There have been errors for 12 years. I've been waiting for someone competent to address them. I went out through the second set of doors, through the inner gate, across the flagstone yard that caught the late afternoon light like still water. The glacier wind had settled. The clouds had lifted off the upper towers. The Vale Reach stood full in the clear cold air of the highland afternoon, stone and aloe, and 12 years of a regent keeping something going, keeping something intact, keeping the room with the south window and the fire on the right-hand wall and the glacier maps in their labeled tubes. I walked to my transport and stowed my pack. 3 weeks of the route waited for me. 6 more delivery points, 2 Highland relay stations, the mid-pass garrison at the Kethoran Center, and the long road down to the Lowland terminals before the circuit brought me back. I had a dispatch packet to deliver, still heavy in the pack, the paperwork of someone's death finally catching up. I had a schedule extended 48 hours by a gate officer's paperwork, signed off by an Empress Regent who was trying to be a person, who didn't build expectations she couldn't sustain. I had a name that wasn't entirely mine and a mark on my wrist that had been a mystery for 7 years, and was no longer a mystery. I had a set of corrected glacier maps filed in a records hall above me, labeled in a compact angular hand I recognized from underneath, the way you recognize a language you studied and almost forgot but never entirely lost. I had the knowledge of which section of the mid-pass road to watch in the thaw and why. Knowledge I'd carried for 3 years without knowing where it came from. And I had, somewhere inside the layers of Davin Marsh and the Frontier Medics reconstruction and the years of road work, a person who knew how to say her name with the right weight on the second syllable without being told that it mattered, who sat down across a table from someone who needed someone to sit across from them, who positioned himself at the right side of the fire without thinking about it. The glacier to the north of the pass caught the last direct sun and held it for a moment, white and clear and very cold. I drove out through the outer gate. The flagstones of the outer yard caught the light behind me one more time as I went, that particular quality of light on that particular dark stone, the quiet sense of arrival that I'd never been able to account for. I could account for it now. I thought about what she had said, that the person is not in the memories, that the memories are what gets stored and accessed and lost, but the person is something else, continuous in the way that bone is continuous with the bone it was 20 years ago, even though the material has changed entirely. 7 years of Davin Marsh, layered over 4 years of Davin Vorith, layered over 26 years of a man who had arrived at a Highland fortress with a terrible accent and opinions about cartographic notation, and the sense to sit down when someone needed someone to sit across from them. All of it the same person, none of the pieces canceling out any other. 3 weeks. I had work to do, and then I was going home.